When Facebook first went public in 2012, founder Mark Zuckerberg was on top of the world with 1 billion users, $100 billion, and even a movie about his success story.
People want to go on the internet and check out their friends, so why not build a website that offers that friends, pictures, profiles?
But just a few years later, during the 2016 elections, Facebook went from being the hot stock to being in hot water.
Personally, I think the idea that fake news on Facebook, of which it's a very small amount of the content, influence the election in any way, I think is a pretty crazy idea.
So crazy it just might be true, something Zuckerberg was forced to acknowledge before Congress last year.
One of my greatest regrets in running the company is that we were slow in identifying the Russian information operations in 2016.
Zuckerberg admitted that more than 120 million Americans had seen Russian ads like these on his site, which U.S. intel officials say were intended to help Trump's campaign. He also admitted that personal information from more than 80 million Facebook users was taken without their knowledge by the now-defunct data firm Cambridge Analytica. My next guest, venture capitalist Roger McNamee, was first involved before all the success and the scandal. McNamee was invited to a meeting with a 22-year-old Zuckerberg just 2 years after Facebook first went live, becoming an early investor and a pivotal advisor, even introducing him to now Chief Operating Officer Sheryl Sandberg. He sang the company's praises in a TED Talk in 2011.
Facebook has won. It is the new Windows. If you're going to do a startup today in the social world, build it on top of Facebook. That's the only piece of advice I can give you.
These days, it's safe to say he feels a little differently. In his new book, Zucked, Waking Up to the Facebook Catastrophe, he writes, Facebook has managed to connect 2.2 billion people and drive them apart at the same time. Roger McNamee, who was also in the room when Jeff Bezos pitched investors the idea for Amazon, by the way, he joins me now. Roger, it's good to see you.
Jim, great to be back.
Is that you, that guy in that video?
Yeah.
It's hard to believe.
Well, I'm on a book tour, so I cut my hair.
Let's go to that first meeting. Give me a couple of sentences, first impression of this 22-year-old kid.
So he was uncanny in many ways. So he had a vision that I thought was absolutely compelling and a plan for getting there that was unique and, in my mind, almost guaranteed that if he followed it, Facebook would be more successful than Google was at that time, which was a huge, huge deal.
I think you wrote that they had only $9 million in revenue. Part of what you did in that meeting up front was talk him out of any billion-dollar offer that might come his way, which actually
it turned out, yeah, I proposed this idea that it was going to come, and it turned out that's what the meeting was about. So that started this 3-year period where I was an advisor.
Why did you think this little firm was essentially one of the most important to be on the planet?
The issue we had with all large networks was trolls, basically bad actors coming in and bullying everybody else. And Mark had this notion at the beginning that people would have authenticated identity. They would have to use an email address from their university or from their high school. And in my mind, by guaranteeing actual identity, the odds of having trolls overrun the place was driven nearly to zero. And I thought that was such a genius move. If he had sustained it, a lot of what we saw would not have happened.
And it's fair to say you mentored him for quite a while.
I was one of several mentors that he had, and my role was around the business. I had a uniformly great relationship with him. He was one of the most exciting and fun people I've ever worked with, and I've worked with many of the best in Silicon Valley.
So what changed in 2016, Roger?
To be clear, sometime along the way, they became convinced that their mission of connecting the whole world was so important that it justified any means to get there. And they became so convinced of their wisdom that no criticism was allowed at all. Mm-hmm. So I think when I went to them in October of 2016, both he and Sheryl treated my idea as a public relations problem rather than the possibility that a trusted friend was bringing them a real issue that they needed to look into.
What'd you tell them?
I told them that I was terrified that the business model and the algorithms of Facebook were allowing bad actors to harm innocent people. And I had seen it in a bunch of different areas, mostly civil rights, as well as the Brexit referendum in the United Kingdom.
And one of the first things, a Bernie Bro thing, or an alleged Bernie Bro thing in New Hampshire. Is that right?
No, that's true. And that was in the Democratic primary at the very beginning. And I believe, we can't confirm this yet, but I believe that was a Russian project that was going on there.
They were, is it fair to say, polite in response, but not wildly interested in the content?
I would say polite, but not even remotely interested. I think, to be clear, for at least 5 years before that, every critic who had ever come in had been mostly wrong. And so they'd gotten super used to the notion that if critic, then wrong, and therefore they went forward as though I didn't have anything valuable there.
I knew of you, I didn't know you till earlier today, but I read a lot about you. It's hard for me to believe that prior to 2016 and this Black Lives Matter thing and this Bernie Bros thing, this faux Bernie Bros thing, you didn't have a serious inkling that this company was running off the track?
To be clear, there were a couple of signals. But there were also lots of signals that things were going really, really well. And I was at the tail end of a very successful career. I had transitioned to retirement right in front of 2016. And so I had, and this is no excuse, but I had a failure of analysis where, I was really happy with the rosy view I had of the company. I was at the tail end of my career. I didn't have an investment decision to make. And I was sloppy, and I really regret that. I feel terrible about that.
So when you went to them in 2016 and cited specific examples of your concerns, from that moment on, what were the concerns you had for all of us, so the people, the users?
The problem was that I didn't have hard data. So it took me 6 months after I gave up pushing Facebook, and I spent 3 months on them, and then 6 months trying to figure out what the heck I'd seen. And I met somebody named Tristan Harris, who had been a design ethicist at Google, who explained to me something I should have known, but which I didn't know, which was how Facebook and Google and other internet platforms use psychological tricks, first to create habits, and then to get people into energized emotional states, usually fear and outrage, in order to get them to spend a ton of time and share a lot of stuff on.
And what's the
sites.
danger of that in your estimation?
So the issue is that once people get into a habit, if they're on
an addiction of sorts.
Well, that's what happens. Once they're in a habit, then they tip over into an addiction. I always ask people, when do you check your phone first thing in the morning, right? Is it before you pee or while you're peeing? Because nobody waits any longer than that.
Have you been at my house? Or
I come every morning. I get to check you out. If you have an Android phone, I can just follow you around.
Okay, so what? So I have an addiction. So what concerns you about that addiction, other than it's not socially responsible?
So the thing that I've discovered is this is not just an issue for Facebook. This is an issue for Instagram, Google, YouTube, and many other sites that work on that same advertising-based business
model. So what's it mean
for
me?
What it means for you is that they're gathering a lot of data from your activity, and instead of pointing that to make the product or service better for you, they're taking most of it to create other products that essentially suck economic value out of your life and use often against you. And so the way to think about
health, financial, all those kinds
exactly.
of things.
So think of it as they're damaging your public health and that of your children. They're undermining democracy. They are violating your privacy in ways which actually alter your ability to make choices without fear. And the key thing about all this is they're not doing this by design. They're doing it as a byproduct of a business model that requires them to do massive surveillance and massive manipulation of attention, which leaves you vulnerable to bad people coming in and then manipulating what you think and what you do.
Okay, so I was worried when I'm reading your book that you weren't going to come up with solutions, but you do.
Yeah.
And you think Congress should essentially end many of these practices. But I have to say, as soon as I saw the word Congress, the first thought that came to my mind was this line of questioning from former Senator Orrin Hatch. Here it is.
Well, how do you sustain a business model in which users don't pay for your service?
Senator, we run ads.
Zuckerberg was laughing at him. I mean, they could not have been more clueless. The 535 members like that are the ones who are going to save us from Mark Zuckerberg?
So I have enormous respect for Senator Hatch, but he is now retired.
Yes.
We have 40 new members of Congress, 39 of whom I believe are 40 or below. They are digital natives. The thing to understand is that within an hour and a half of that quote right there, the FBI raided Paul Manafort's home, the news cycle shifted, and we never saw the really fine questioning that took place later that day or the next day. And my point to you here, and I'm spending a lot of time in Washington, I have enormous confidence in our Congress on both sides. There was no reason to suspect Silicon Valley until 18 months ago. We built up legitimate trust over a long period of time because the Valley's shipped good products, and Google and Facebook took advantage of that. They harvested a lot of goodwill, and there's been enormous harm done. Everybody in Washington knows they have to do something.
Okay, I have 30 seconds left. For every federal elected official who sits in that very chair in the next several weeks, what's the one question I should ask them?
It's really simple. Are you going to end practices like the sale and trading of personal financial information like credit card data? Are you going to end the sale and trading of personal health data? Are you going to end the sale and trading of geolocation data from cell phone companies? Are you going to protect children? That's the place to start. We have to stop this kind of economy now and then have a negotiation about what's reasonable.
Your book is great, Roger. Pleasure to meet you. Even though I like that outfit and that look a lot better.
Well, you know, I would have worn it if I just needed somebody to tell me what my wardrobe was.
Next time, can we do that?
You bet.
Roger McNamee. The book again is Zucked, Waking Up to the Facebook Catastrophe.